For Wollondilly.
Thank you. I move that a bill introduced for an act to amend the State Environment Planning Policy, Precincts, Western Parkland City 2021 to allow residential accommodation on certain land in the Wollondilly local government area that may be affected by aircraft noise from the new Western Sydney International Airport.
The question is that the bill be now introduced. All those in favour please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
I bring up the bill, an electronic copy of which has been provided to the clerk, and move that this bill now be read a second time. Thank you, Speaker. I rise to speak in support of my bill, which aims to fix the concerns and frustrations I have regarding the restrictions of the State Environment Planning Policy, Precincts, Western Parkland City 2021, New South Wales, Western Parkland City SEPP, and the effect this SEPP has right now on many of the residents in Wollondilly. To quickly summarise and allay some fears, this amendment is not about pushing for mass development, or it is not about trying to intensify land use. Anyone can already subdivide in some of those areas. What this is about is allowing the rights that landowners had prior to the SEPP 2021 existing. That's right, to build granny flats in their own backyards. Members, we are not talking about little tiny blocks, not 400 square metres or even the old half an acre. Many of these properties, some of which are 20 or 30 acres, are not able to build a granny flat since the introduction of the bill in 2021. But they can still build a 20-bedroom home right now, today. These restrictions enforced as a ban on any new noise-sensitive developments, including residential secondary dwellings, as informed by the Australian Noise Exposure Contour Mapping of the Draft Environmental Impact Assessment, have resulted in significant consequences for the residents and the local economy. The impacts of the SEPP restrictions have been felt already by the residents of Wollondilly in suburbs such as Silverdale, Warragamba, Warrombi, Wallacia, Teresa Park and Orangeville. In the time since it was enacted, it has seen individuals unable to construct secondary dwellings on their properties. Some who bought their properties specifically to build a dwelling for themselves and a granny flat for their parents. It was literally introduced overnight with absolutely no warning on people who had plans already drawn up and ready to submit. This also has had a cascading effect on the local tradespeople, who find themselves with a reduced opportunity for work in the area. This amounts to what I had previously labelled in this place a tradies tax. Wollondilly has long distances to travel already. Forcing locals to travel out of the area for work is unfair and unsustainable. Let me give you some sizes of area to get your head around what I'm talking about. The Wollondilly Council area is as big as the entire Sydney metropolitan area. The area that has this SEPP covers a circle of radius of about 30 kilometres. If we applied that to Sydney Airport, that would take up in all the areas of Sydney and over the harbour. Imagine only one dwelling on each parcel of land. The restrictions on secondary dwellings also represent a missed opportunity, not only allowing individual landowners to build second residence on their properties, but limits true affordable housing options and alternatives in an area which is growing rapidly in population. Wollondilly, due to its location and potential, can provide some of the housing to meet some of the needs of a growing Greater Sydney population. Infill housing of smaller dwellings such as granny flats in well-located developed areas with existing infrastructure is an opportunity to meet some of the housing goal to deliver a range of housing, and the SEPP restrictions make no sense in a time of great need for housing. The secondary dwellings can allow young families to save, grandparents to downsize and to look after grandchildren, help on small acreage properties to actually live on site, to name but a few of the benefits. The restriction of the SEPP currently have one exception over 6 Walmsley Crescent, Silverdale, where a single secondary dwelling has been permitted. An amendment to the Wollondilly Local Environment Plan Amendment, Precincts Western Parkland City 2022, grants this one individual address within the restricted area an exemption, while all others have been subject to the restrictive planning policies. If the SEPP was able to be reversed by the Head of Department of Planning, as it has been in this one instance, then given the far-reaching benefits of allowing secondary dwellings, the same right to build should be granted to all residents as a matter of urgency. I've spent my time since being elected in March 2023 to work with the government on this matter. Unlike some other members, I don't seek to move many bills or amendments in this place. The government and opposition understand and know my position. I'm here to work with any and all parties for the long-term best interest for Wollondilly. My age, my previous career in politics, and now I've acted with the government amendments should allow this only as a last resort. Unfortunately, the work I've had with the government since has not led to much in this matter. I've had many meetings with the Minister for Planning regarding this matter. This was referred on to Federal Minister King, who said she had no real responsibility or opinion on the matter. We then had the Premier visit Lisa Osborne of Silverdale. The Osborne family approached his visit so that they could see the situation that they were caught in. He sat with her at her property. He sat next to her shed and caravan house where two families live. This was on a massive block of land, cleared from previous farm activity. The Premier had the will to fix the matter if he could as soon as possible, and I understand the will is probably still there, but the action I and the family are yet to see. I have been told this is something to do with the Western Sydney City deal. Having been the lead mayor on the negotiations around this deal, I can assure all of you this has nothing to do with the imposition of this SEPP over some of my community. The Osbornes sold their property home to live with their sons on the same property, to build two brand new forever homes, and to enjoy everything Wollondilly has to offer. They had hoped at this stage, I'm sure, to have planted gardens and continue work on the bushland and the property they have. Instead, they wait for the slow wheels of government to turn. They live in a shed and a caravan, waiting patiently, but with incredible growing frustration. And they are but one example. I've been told consistently through this process that we need to wait for the final mapping of flights for the airport. This will not make any difference at all. The airport is being built there, the runways are in place, trial flights are happening, and the homes are still there. I might add, just in case some of you thought that this was being stopped because of the noise and the noise will be too much, you're incorrect, because none of these particular homes or dwellings are in programs for noise abatement alterations. To add insult to injury, just over the border in the Luddenham village, much closer to the airport, it has a protection with a line allowing for additional dwellings, but my villages do not. This has to be due to laziness of former members or sloppiness of contact with council. I don't know who's to blame, ultimately, nor do I or my community or Lisa Osborne really care. We just want this fixed. I've written to the public and parliamentary inquiries at both state and federal levels on the matter, and again, my community and residents like Lisa Osborne wait. My suggested amendments of this SEPP will also include a full list of localities affected by the same restrictions, including Silverdale, Warragamba, Warrombi, Wallacia, Teresa Park and Orangeville, and would be in keeping with other limited localities located within the same SEPP. However, the difficulties in sub-localities meant it's easier to mention by the full council area. I'm happy for others to ask for inclusion of their own council areas affected, but as an independent MP, my focus is on my own community. I did not see this as my place or purpose to make amendments for others. There is also a lack of consideration for financial compensation or support in areas where the SEPP restrictions are applied. Specifically, the current mapping used to enforce the construction restrictions differs from that used to indicate financial compensation for measures such as double glazing to mitigate noise impacts on affected properties. It is perplexing that individuals who've been restricted from constructing secondary dwellings, supposedly due to the mapping, supposedly due to the noise, are not afforded the benefits of any compensation for noise reduction measures. This inconsistency in the application of policies seems unjust, especially considering the broader economic and social impacts on the affected residents. The government maps show the ANEC 20 boundary line as the outermost coloured line on the flight paths maps, indicate residents eligible for treatment for noise mitigation, contrast greatly to the area impacted by restrictions on building secondary dwellings, which apply to the entire 30-kilometre radial zone surrounding the airport. except, I remind you, Luddenham and that one specific address. It is time to lift the SEPP restrictions in Wollondilly, taking into account the hardship faced by property owners and the local workforce. While I understand the Minister for Planning's position on fundamentally not supporting private members' amendments of the SEPPs, as he's told me, this matter, as anyone can see, needs to be fixed in some way. The conversation about the airport is one that's going to last for generations, and now is not the time to shut the door. Additionally, I would recommend a reconsideration of the allocation of financial compensation for noise mitigation measures, ensuring a fair and equitable distribution of benefits for all affected parties. This is outside the scope of this amendment, but something I'm looking to have some impact on, and cannot wait to hear from federal candidates in the new bellwether seats in the Macarthur region on what they are doing about noise mitigation for residents in our area. Wollondilly has all the downsides of the new airport, but none of the employment opportunities, as the distance to travel for residents is unrealistic for a daily commute. This is over a bridge that floods regularly and the access is impossible. All those new jobs sitting just over the bridge. Furthermore, to return to the SEPP, the restrictions that defer development until the completion of information regarding the new airport has no end date. It is interesting to note the affected properties will not be able to construct attached dwellings, boarding houses, dual occupancies, group homes, hostels, multi-dwelling housing, residential flat dwellings, rural workers' dwellings, secondary dwellings, as we know, commonly called granny flats, semi-detached dwellings, senior housing, and shop-top housing. As I have stated, the flight paths are now released, and it's not viable to hold off all development within the SEPP identified area beyond the local vicinity of the estimated 30 years it will take to complete for full capacity. Further studies will not allow some magic solution, and the information based on building requirements and planning could be put in place today to allow this development. Landowners, remember, had these rights until 2021, and removing the rights of these landowners to submit applications. Currently, it will favour large enterprises who will landlock small owners who are then likely to be forced out, waiting just to build their own home. It will inevitably lead to housing that is not in keeping with the strategy to consolidate growth, and it is not supported by Wollondilly Shire Council. Additional dwellings, however, are not opposed by councillors, and this is not an issue that metropolitan councils are facing with things like neighbourhood conflicts. These are very large blocks in Wollondilly rural setting, and they could easily accommodate additional small dwellings such as secondary dwellings, senior housing and attached dwellings. There is a need for this change as residents are being restricted, and there is no end point to when that restriction will be lifted. I've pointed out to the government, acknowledging concerns of both the New South Wales and federal government, in particular their concern that the addition of additional dwellings and development within the area could potentially cause a negative impact to residents. If it is intensification you do not want under the airport, there is a grave misunderstanding here that additional dwellings means mass development. That is not the case. However, the limitations for what the New South Wales Government, what I've requested to be lifted, is technically defined secondary dwellings. It's not the residential intensification referred to in Minister King's letter. The reference in response that there could be new owners or renters affected assumes that there is new blocks. This change will make new blocks. The Minister is mistaken and does not recognise the limitation of the SEPP on current owners, and that my request was not for additional subdivision rights to be restored. Residential accommodation and additional dwellings as defined in the SEPP affects both potential new blocks as well as current, which removes the potential rights that were in place, remember, for those owners. In effect, the SEPP has stopped someone with a consent from building a secondary dwelling, as we know, commonly called a granny flat, on their property. Residential accommodation, as defined within the SEPP, has the same meaning as in the standard local environment planning instrument, prescribed by the standard instrument, Local Environment Plans Orders 2006. That instrument defines residential accommodation to include attached dwellings, boarding houses, co-living houses, dual occupancies, dwelling homes, group homes, hostels, multi-dwelling housing, residential flat buildings, rural workers' dwellings, secondary dwellings, semi-detached dwellings, senior housing and shop-top housing, but does not include tourist and visitor accommodation or caravan parks. The list is all permissible on blocks with consent and is limited to a single or one additional dwelling through the secondary dwelling path. That is what is allowable under this until the SEPP came into play. Whilst I acknowledge again the concern of the Federal Minister in raising experiences with both overflight noise in Brisbane and Melbourne, this is not a question for the blocks that are under the flight paths in my electorate. My request is to not remove the restriction for subdivision potential. Rather, it is the restoration of the rights for additional dwellings as defined above, allowing the construction of a granny flat on a rural block instead of restricting an owner to building a larger, unsightly home or to continue to live in sheds without consent. In both instances, the people are the same. The number of rooms are the same, and therefore there is no concern with potential renters or new owners. The Minister has noted there is a large number of potential secondary dwellings. These blocks all have the rights to extend their home for the same size as a granny flat. This would also require the same type of council consent. The limitation has been set by the SEPP, forces landowners to not have the same right as all other landowners in New South Wales. It has affected my residents by owners being unable to build the affordable additional dwellings for elderly parents and children on their blocks. Now, the flight paths are released and the restriction for the SEPP should be lifted to allow these additional dwellings applications to be lodged. It makes no sense with the government requiring housing to put a restriction on smaller landowners prohibiting an additional dwelling such as a small 2-bedroom granny flat on their 20-acre block in Wollondilly. But they are still allowed to build a single dwelling, 20-bedroom home, if there is no housing on the block. As I said, lifting this SEPP would cover some of the housing supplies issues of the state and Wollondilly. Noise obviously isn't the issue here. The 20-bedroom home could be built today. Water isn't even the issue here. We have capacity problems in the eastern side of my electorate that limits any construction in many areas, because it's okay to approve developments without sewer connections there apparently. But 20 minutes from the new airport, you can't even build a granny flat. This shows not only an inconsistency, but cynically I question why only major developers seem to get approvals. Why is that you can have 10, 15 or 20,000 houses get approval with the click of someone's finger and a signature on a paper? But private owners with existing rights wanting to build 2 dwellings and not just one are treated with contempt. It just does not pass the pub test, and I hope the government considers this very carefully. So I asked all the members to support my bill to fix the concerns and frustrations caused by the introduction of the state environmental planning policy and halt the unfair and unjust effect on the residents on the northern end of the Wollondilly electorate. I now move that the debate now be adjourned. Sorry, I finished. Sorry.
I call the member for Kiama.
Madam Speaker, I move this debate be now adjourned.
The question is that this debate be now adjourned. All of that opinion, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it, the ayes have it.
Speaker, I ask that you fix the resumption of this debate as an order for a future day.
I fix the resumption of this debate as an order of the day for the future day. The clerk will read the next item of business.